Today is May the 2nd. And if you've been in my house long enough, you'll know there's a famous statement that sounds a little something like this. You know, Dylan, I've been thinking. I think you're right. I think that maybe I'm coming around to understanding what you're saying about fill in the blanks. In this particular case, that happens to refer to all the conversation I've been having with Lisa about uprooting our family's way of doing life right now and spending 6 months in the US, 90 days in Spain, 90 days in Canada. And so this morning it was a great conversation just about how she's seeing maybe a little bit about what I'm seeing, and that there's a unique a unique perspective that an entrepreneur has that maybe somebody who's employed, who has a career, doesn't necessarily have. We certainly, we started going through our friends list and we're like, well, who else is thinking the way we're thinking? And really, the list is pretty short because the only other people that are having the kinds of conversations or contemplating the types of things we're contemplating are other business owners, other entrepreneurs, other people who at 2 in the morning are wondering how they're going to make payroll, how they're going to pay for their kids' education, how they're going to not die while they build a business and provide meaningful employment for people. And so she came around. She's starting to see it. And as we talk through it, again, it's this idea that based on yesterday's episode, it's not about money anymore because on a tax adjusted basis, whether you go to the US or stay where we are in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, math's all the same. So you're not necessarily moving for mathematical reasons. You're moving for or making a decision like this because there are other things at play. And what we talked about today that made seem to make a lot of sense is that there is an idea that no matter how hard you work, you're going to hit a point of diminishing returns, where the harder you work doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to generate a better result. And maybe you hold out hope that you think you will, but I think every business owner gets to that point where they'll say, look, what could I actually do with this business? At what point am I prepared to accept the trade-offs and just build something around that, and then take all of your extra energy and burn it somewhere else? And for me, that looks like maybe he's trying to start a business in the US. Um, Fridays are the day when I go into the office. I sit with our project management team and we talk about the upcoming week. We talk about maybe just some of the issues that we can't deal with in our day-to-day teams calls that we have. But before that, I was able to go visit with a pal of mine, have a coffee, who's just right in the midst of wrestling with the very things that I've been talking about, which is a bunch of branch offices, tons of capital at risk. Basically said this morning, you know what, as an entrepreneur, you just have to understand that the bank owns everything and that you don't own anything, and that the reason you run a business or become a business owner is because it's better than getting a job. Because there's an artificial sense of freedom and flexibility, but he certainly was feeling the pressure of now the investments that they're having to make to support these businesses, where maybe there isn't a big brass ring waiting on the other side for them. And you could just sense and feel the frustration that he believes a recession is around the corner. So he has a bit of a different perspective than I do. He's younger than I am as well. And so kind of the mental math that he's running is different than the mental math that I'm running, but same principled challenge, which is it worth it? How much is it worth it? How far do I end up taking this before I just say it's not worth it? I have another friend runs a business, does about $40 million a year. There's three partners, two of them are pretty much retired, but they're still sitting on payroll. He's the one that does all the work. He's a little bit older than I am, but on $40 million worth of revenue, it's a pretty thin margin business. They're in concrete. Um, he says net, 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 net. At the end of the day, we might divide up a couple $1 million. He says, but we've got hundreds of staff. We've got tons of liability, from people dying on site to getting injured on site to not keeping our bank covenants in line for our operating lines of credit, for all of the shenanigans that go along with managing people. He just says, you know what? It would be better. I could make more money on a relative basis if I just took a couple guys and just went and did concrete curbs all day long. My life would be easy, and I wouldn't necessarily have the big vacation house and all the other fancy things that I get access to every now and then. But he says, you know what? Net, 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 at the end of the day, I'm not even sure they're all worth it anyway. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with this challenge of, after I've provided for my family, maybe I have a semblance of a business that's not going to die tomorrow. Then what am I doing? I remember in my 30s, I went through this crisis of purpose and ended up visiting with about a dozen or so guys that I had managed money for at the time, extremely wealthy Calgarians that had built and sold businesses. I mean, really wealthy. And I asked two questions. I said, if you made 100,000, how come you didn't make a million? If you made a million, how come you didn't make 10? If you made 10, how come you didn't make 100? And then the second question was, why do you do what you do? And so the answer to the first question was, I'm working on it. The answer to the second question was, well, this is kind of all I know how to do. And at 30 years old, I really, really struggled with that because our bills have been taken care of. We had two kids, not five at the time. It was 2007, so I didn't know that the financial crisis was around the corner and was totally going to decimate everything in our life. But I understand that frustration of purpose. Now, fast forward 17 years, I don't have that same crisis of purpose. Now it's about what is the highest and best use of me, my family, our resources. And this whole recording my thoughts is being done because I'm really trying to work that out in real time right now. And today, I think our business that we have will continue to grow organically, will provide meaningful employment for people, but I still have lots of energy to burn, and I'm just not sure this is the place that I want to burn it. Um, in saying that, I did get a chance to meet with one of our site supervisors who helps us run our Latino crews and is helping us to staff up for the amount of work that we've got on the books for this year. And he pays pretty well. We pay pretty well, so he's able to attract people. They get paid very well. But you start looking at like hourly wages, and we had this conversation where here in Calgary, we're paying kind of a starting wage at $20 up to 25. You become kind of a foreman, site supervisor. You can get up to $30 an hour plus project-based commissions that get paid out when we get paid. And so you can kind of earn that up to 35, just short of $40 an hour for what would otherwise be pretty general labor type work. We're in the demolition and asbestos abatement business, but you get lots of freedom, and we try to add all the other perks that come along with working in a small business: flexibility, freedom. Um, we have a benefits program, which typically isn't available to this kind of a workforce. So anyway, but we're talking, and I was talking with my site soup, and he was telling me that wages for even general labor is now starting to climb. So that $20 that we would start people at kind of looks like $25. So I was like, well, I wonder. I have an online labor platform, so of course I'm familiar with what labor rates are. But just for those of you that are listening or watching, the minimum wage in the province that I live in is $15 an hour, rising, going up. In Texas, it's 7.25 an hour. Not a lot of people working at 7.25 an hour in our business, like on an apples to apples basis. So the average wage in Texas for construction work is about $25 an hour. Here in our country, that looks closer to like $35 an hour. And so what happens, I think, in an environment like ours is costs are rising. Even Lisa says to me, the cost of apples, bananas, things are going up in Canada, which means the workforce is going to need to make more wages, which means companies will just, because the market is efficient, thank God that it is, I believe that it is, that companies will be able to pass those costs on or get better pricing for the work that they're doing, but it's not going to happen right away. So I think what's going to have to happen is wages are going to increase before companies can increase their pricing. And so companies like us, we just carry the difference. And why do you do that? Because there's other companies in the market that aren't going to raise their prices. So it'll kind of be like a last man standing exercise before a couple of companies simply can't make it anymore. And then companies will be able to catch up, reprice themselves, and then be able to now start earning back their margin that they had to give up so they could pay their workers to keep their workers. So all of that to be said, this comes down to that question again. If wages keep going up, but we're facing a potential recession, I'm not totally sure I get that, but I do believe we're going to see labor costs go up because people just have to earn more. They're just not going to, there aren't enough laborers in the market. There aren't enough workers in the marketplace. Because there aren't enough workers in the marketplace, they're going to continue to be able to earn more finally, because I do think they've been cut short over the last bunch of years during the last kind of 2 decades of enormous economic growth. So they're going to be able to catch up with their wages, but these companies just aren't going to be making it. Most small businesses aren't run well to begin with. Most of them just kind of live month to month, year to year, but they're not making real money after you deduct the income that the owner might be making. And so you kind of, again, you get back to this question, why am I doing this? The M&A activity in Canada isn't huge. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff. So today was a conversation where I was reminded of another reason to consider going somewhere else, somewhere like a Texas, where you have more flexibility with wages, which means you have more flexibility with pricing, and cost of living is not as high either. But I don't know that that's true. So in the next episode, I'm going to talk about cost of living and do some research before I chat and yak again, because I do want to know wages might be one thing, but then how does that compare to the cost of living? Because at first I thought maybe the reason to do something else is because your taxes would be better. Now I've discovered that isn't true. So it's not a math exercise for personal or corporate taxes, but maybe there's an opportunity to have a higher standard of living on a relative basis. You get to keep more money in your pocket because the cost of living is less than maybe what it would be here. So it's kind of where I'm at today. If someone asked me point blank, Dylan, is today a stay or a go day? The answer is it is definitely a go day.